Hi, my name is Nate Speare. I'm a practicing astrologer and consultant and astrological researcher. And so today I'd like to give you a little forecast of the cosmic weather that we can expect to happen over the next week. And also to give you some body-based exercises for empowering ourselves to deal with or kind of balance the way that we might habitually react to some of the energy that's likely to present itself to us this week. Transformation and instincts are the name of the game right now. And we might say that that's always the case on one level, but it's even more so likely to kind of bring itself right into our faces and right into the light this week. So as far as transits go, we've got the sun, the sun is our conscious sense of self, it's our inner creative engine, it's really the direction that we turn towards. The sun keeps moving forward in the sign of Libra. So Libra ruling everything from charm, one-on-one relationships, harmony, diplomacy, fine art, aesthetics. Sun keeps on moving forward in Libra. And it's making a square this week to Pluto, the ruler of the underworld and the lord of the unconscious, and instinct coming out and lashing out and bubbling forth. The sun's making a challenging angle to Pluto. And Pluto is collaborating with Saturn, who is the lord of structure and discipline and integrity, and really shows us what karma is all about, among other things. You know, Saturn's the part of us that shows us when you plant a seed in the ground, you can only get the fruit of that particular seed that we planted. But Pluto being the most powerful of all these planets, Pluto is really showing us what our visceral gut instincts and emotional responses are to things. So it's really about instinct, bringing clarity to our instinct, which means, especially with all of this sun energy in Libra, which can be very friendly and amiable, the clarity around our instincts could either be saying, go towards that, or it could be a kind of instinct saying that it might be better to draw boundaries against something that could be inhibiting our autonomy in some way. But either way, this week our instincts are for sure brought to light. And in addition to the sun, the moon is also going to be with Saturn. It's also going to be with Pluto. So the moon, which is the way that we get our emotional needs met, the way that our intuition comes forward in the world, it's also like kind of going up against these two big boys this week of Saturn, the taskmaster structure person, and Pluto, the unconscious instinct person. So it's likely, you know, the moon being how we get our emotional needs met, it's likely to be the clarity around our instincts, rather I should say, is likely to have this kind of heavily emotional coloration to it. But before it brushes up against either of those, it's going to go into the sign of Scorpio, where it rubs up against Venus, Aphrodite, goddess of beauty and charm and art and aesthetics and the erotic force. Venus is also close to the asteroid Juno, Hera, the goddess of marriage. And so again, instincts continue to show up, and a lot of moodiness, like emotional mood swings and fluctuations in moods over the course of the next week. So it could be a great time, an opportunity to take some alone time on the one hand, especially for those of us who consider ourselves slightly more introverted. Or if you have a partner, you could also channel this deep instinctual energy into, you know, a hot evening or a hot time with your partner. Just make sure taking proper precautions, of course, because considering the reproductive power of the sign of Scorpio, which is where the moon and Venus and Juno, Hera are going to be, and also the maternal energy of the moon and of Juno, Hera, you get what I mean? It could be a kind of potent combination if we don't take proper precaution in terms of passion with our partners this week. Unless, of course, we want a heavily reproductive outcome. That's a different thing. Then it could be a ripe time. So, in any case, it's a right time altogether, because another thing that's happening in terms of more like fiery, go-get-em and optimistic and obstacles be damned bodies, we've got Mars, who's the pioneer. And of course, when the pioneer is blocked, then it becomes the warrior. That's one of the things that my great mentor, Montgomery Taylor, taught me about Mars. And Mars is squaring, again, this kind of like, the square is kind of this angle of creative challenge. So we've got Mars, the pioneer and the warrior, challenging Jupiter, the planet of expansion and zest for life and ability to rule our lives and see the bigger picture of everything all around us. Mars challenging Jupiter, also forming creative tension with Jupiter. It's kind of about being selective about the foundations that we're building our partnerships and networks off of. And another way of putting that is, there is great supportive energy there for us this week to seek support from our relationships. So this is especially good to keep in mind if you're not somebody who is necessarily accustomed to doing that, like reaching out to your loved ones, not necessarily for advice, but for support for your sense of murkiness and uncertainty. So using the support of our loved ones to gauge how we want to move forward could be a really good thing to do this week. So if it's a time when you're feeling a lot of lack of clarity, it's great to reach out to your loved ones, or vice versa. If you're feeling very clear about yourself and where your life stands right now, where your intentions are, it's a time when you can kind of infuse your relationships with that sense of clarity and intention, while also at the same time ensuring that we listen deeply, listen wholeheartedly to the people around us, and listen with compassion to the people around us. So in the meanwhile, Mercury, Hermes, the communicator, and also the trickster, is trying to ground all of this in the sign of Virgo. He's still creeping up in the sign of Virgo, which is a health and healing sign, by the way, among some other things. Mercury Hermes is kind of preparing us, he's preparing to sort of launch these impulses that we're having toward new harmonious networks and connections, as Mercury prepares to go into the sign of Libra, so that we can take all the kind of solar and Jupiter-based expansion that we've been feeling in our relationships and in our artistic and also personal relationships, and that then we can take that and communicate it. So we may be feeling that to varying levels and varying degrees, and that's very normal and personal according to what's happening with each of us individually. But Mercury, one thing that we might feel extremely potently in terms of Mercury is that he's opposing Chiron. And Chiron in astrology is known as the wounded healer. So Mercury, being the god of communication, being right in the opposite position of Chiron in the sky, he's bringing wounds, especially past wounds, to our attention. So vulnerabilities are coming up. Things like rejections from the past are coming up. Hurts are coming up. Very raw, tender parts might be emerging. And this might especially be the case for millennials, especially people born in the latter half of the 1980s, or people in their 50s who are having their first Chiron return. But really it's relevant to everybody. And why I say that about millennials is because the people in that age group are likely right now experiencing what's known as a Chiron square, where Chiron, we said again, square is that angle of challenge, makes this challenging angle to where Chiron was when you were born. So we're likely to feel lots of wounds of rejection coming up. Rejection-based wounds, or also wounds that arise out of sort of careless accidents that seem to be no fault of our own. Because one of the stories briefly about the way Chiron was wounded was that Hercules was kind of carelessly shooting arrows and just kind of showing off. And these arrows, unbeknownst to anybody, happened to be coated, the tips of them were coated with poison that caused incurable wounds. And this poison came from the monster, the Hydra. So he was just shooting these arrows, and one of them happened to fall somewhere between Chiron's knee and thigh, depending on what version of the story you read. And so Chiron received an incurable wound. And prior to that, Chiron's initial wounding was that his mother, a nymph, was raped by Saturn. So Chiron was born as the result of a rape. And when he was born, his mother was so disgusted by his appearance that she rejected him and abandoned him. And it wasn't until Apollo, the sun god, adopted Chiron and embraced Chiron and taught Chiron how to kind of come to acceptance or come to grips with his wounds in a new way, that Chiron was able to transcend that initial rejection and that initial wound. So, and there are all kinds of different stories that I may go into in later videos about how that transcendence happened. There are lots of different accounts of what exactly Chiron, what process happened and what he went through to transcend his wounding. But one thing that seems clear is that in order to transcend the wound, Chiron had to go into more pain and to go into the unconscious and go into instinct on a deeper level, relate with his hurts and with his gashes and with his pain in a sort of full panoramic way before he could transcend it. So there was no escaping or running away from it at all. And so seeing that Chiron has particular relevance right now, especially because this week is all about instinct, as I had said in the beginning, and Chiron represents, in a way, a kind of wounding to the instinctual body. In this society, our instinctual body is not really given that much encouragement. We have, at this point in our evolution, compressing and concentrating a lot of our energy up here into our forebrains, into our kind of cerebral cortex areas, and that gives a lot of pressure when visceral gut reactions come up to sort of filter out and sort through problems in that way. And so I'd like to, having said this, to offer you a kind of somatic meditation experience or a somatic experiment that could help counterbalance some of this. I think since one of the things that Chiron rules in general is consciousness, I'm going to do a little experiment where we work with our brain, because our brain, you know, among many things, could be said to rule consciousness, or at the very least self-consciousness. So I want to offer something in which if visceral feelings, you find visceral feelings coming up, and you find your brain feeling a lot of pressure to process these feelings and find out what they mean, I'd like to offer a little experiment whereby we might be able to let the brain actually go a little bit and just experience the brain purely as an organ and as something that doesn't have to be the big controller, but can actually allow all of these bodily and visceral emotions to transpire, knowing that they're going to pass also. When these rejection triggers and you know, abandonment triggers and different kinds of pain triggers come through us emotionally, it's an important thing to keep in mind, you know, you can handle it, you can give yourself a hug, you can give yourself a sense of compassion, and they are going to pass. Extremely important to remind ourselves of that. So keep in mind also, even though I'm talking about this week, it's good to do this across the board. I mean, it's the relevance of these exercises go beyond this week. I said the word somatic, and I might not have defined that word. Somatic basically means experiencing the body from a first-person perspective. So with that said, I'm going to get down on the floor, and I invite you to get down along with me. I'm going to be on a mat, but you can do it totally on a bare floor. It's not going to be damaging to the body. To try this out with me and to totally release yourself from the fear of doing it wrong. This is totally your own investigation and experiment. So, lying down on our backs, we're going to simply rest our back on the ground and rest our attention on the back of the skull on the ground. And rest our attention on the brain falling into the back of the skull. Kind of appreciating that right now the brain can really just be an organ with all of its mass and all of its weight, and not have to control our experience. And just kind of let the eyes fall. Let the eyes fall into the head and just receive. It's okay if your vision gets a little blurry, or if your eyes close a little bit, that's fine too. And just kind of let your skull give itself a little massage by slowly rolling your head from one side to the other. And as you're rolling your head from one side to the other, appreciate how your brain rolls with your skull in every moment. Let your brain fall to each side. Feel the weight of your brain as the skull rolls to each side. Remember to not worry about doing it wrong. And if you notice yourself wandering off in your mind, simply acknowledge that with a sense of gentleness and friendliness, and bring your attention back to the brain falling against the back of the skull and the sides of the skull. And now let your skull fall to the right side, letting your brain fall along with it. And now, with the help of your left hand, you can reach over toward that right side, extending your head, compressing even further into the floor. And let your rib cage fall along with you, with your head. And let your pelvis trail along, so that you're basically rolling over onto your belly. And I've got to reorganize myself here because I gave myself an awkward kind of spatial situation, but let your pelvis trail along so you can roll over onto your belly. And now experience having your hands for some support. And just sort of let your skull release on the front, and let your brain, feel your brain surrendering toward your skull on the front side now. And breathe. Taking your left foot, reach back toward the side that you came from. Let your tail and pelvis follow along. Adjust your arms as you need to, but let your rib cage follow your pelvis. And then once again, let your skull and brain follow your rib cage. And you can continue this process as many times as you like. I encourage you to repeat the process on the other side. So I'm going to stop it here just to prevent the video from becoming too long, but I encourage you to rest a moment in the center here and feel the difference. directing your attention to the brain falling toward the back of the skull. And if you'll just transition back to rejoining me for a moment, but you can feel free to continue to lie down exactly where you are. Simply put your hand on your heart, on your chest, and let's just allow ourselves to feel what we are feeling in this moment. Feeling our feelings with a sense that we don't need to exclude any feeling. We welcome in the pain as well as the joy. And there's no need to label our experience. Just simply feel the sensations in our body. I encourage you over this week to contemplate if you find wounds coming up, especially dealing with rejection or neglect or accidents, to contemplate those wounds, contemplate ways that you've released yourselves from them, and also contemplate the question of what is the gift in the burden? There's a saying that within every burden there's also a gift. So what is the gift in the burden of the wound? And to very frequently this week extend a sense of compassion and friendliness toward yourself. I even encourage you to give yourself a hug from time to time. Ensure our wounded parts that we're not going to abandon them, and also to give your brain a little, maybe not a hug, that might be a little intense for the brain, but a little embrace, a little massage also on the ground as we just did. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I would love very much to hear them, either about the forecast or about the body meditation. I would love also to hear your experiences, so please feel free to comment or to send me a private message as well. Thank you very, very much. See you next week.